This is a casual conversation. So disclaimer number one is what I share in terms of FSMA is our interpretation of what we believe FSMA is and what it will be. The second disclaimer is that it is a casual conversation. I am going to have a little bit of fun, so let's just enjoy this. Okay, slide. So there's a couple things. There's really 4 categories I'm going to go through. I appreciate Omero introducing me. I'm going to just spend a few minutes talking about Paramount Farms, just to put it into perspective, who we are. I'm going to basically talk about the main principles of the Food Safety Modernization Act. And more importantly, I'm going to go into what is Paramount Farms doing about preparing for the future, all right, in terms of the new FSMA rules and regulations. And then, obviously, at the end, similar to Dr. Gary, if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer as best as I can. All right, so moving on. As Omero mentioned, there's a couple of pictures of me in college, okay? As Omero mentioned, I did go to University of California and did get my bachelor's in biology. I absolutely had no intention of working in the food industry. I'm sure this is a pretty typical story. I needed to earn some money. I started working as a lab technician at Golden Cheese, which ended up being bought out by Dairy Farmers of America. One thing leads to another. I'm still in the food industry over 25 years later. So the last 10 years or so of my life were actually spent overseas, as Omero mentioned. I do speak Arabic, so Taco Bell felt that it was a good fit for me to be based out of the Middle East, to establish the QA department for the Middle East, and also to lead the R&D and QA effort for KFC, Pizza Hut, which are the 2 powerhouses in the Middle East, and then Taco Bell came on board just a few years ago. So fabulous opportunity. I really enjoyed it. I do miss being in the Middle East, and I do miss Dubai specifically, but it is great to be back in the U.S., and it is an awesome opportunity to be with Paramount Farms. So, Paramount Farms. Paramount Farms is one of several companies that fall under what's called the Roll Global umbrella. For those that are interested, just go to roll.com. Pretty simple website. You'll see some of the companies that are privately held by a husband and wife team out of Beverly Hills. Fiji Water, Palm Wonderful. You guys may have caught some of the commercials on TV. Paramount Citrus, mainly the Cuties brand. And Paramount Farms, which is the company that I represent, being the largest pistachio grower, vertically integrated pistachio grower in the world. Some of the brands that we support, and it's pretty interesting. Just and this slide is actually not 100% accurate, because we've recently also bought 2 wineries. One in Paso Robles in Central California, and one up in the Napa Valley area as well. So the owners of the companies are expanding their network and investing in other industries. So specifically about Paramount Farms. We've got, at the moment, roughly 1,500 employees, and during the harvest season, which begins typically in mid-August to early September for about 6 to 8 weeks, we bring on board another 300 or 400 additional temporary employees. Our corporate offices are in Los Angeles. We do have a main plant in Lost Hills, and for those of you that don't know where Lost Hills is, it is roughly an hour west of Bakersfield, and it's an hour east of San Luis Obispo. We are very proud of the fact that we do have and continue to develop the best and the most modern manufacturing facilities. Just to put it into perspective, we have inaugurated and launched the first steam pasteurizer for pistachios in partnership with a German company called Bühler-Barth. That investment alone was a little bit over $40 million. because it's not just the pasteurizer, it's the building that has to go around the pasteurizer. We've got a little bit over $200 million that we're investing in the next 12 months in terms of new manufacturing buildings, new equipment, more capacity, et cetera, et cetera. We just finished our harvest about a month or so ago. Record-setting harvest for us in terms of almonds and pistachios, 450 million pounds of pistachios. And our harvest was a little bit over 130 million pounds of almonds. So we're a key player in the pistachio industry, and we are a player in the almond industry. If you add all of our acreage together, if you add our citrus acreage, our pistachio acreage, our pomegranate acreage, etc., we actually are the largest farming company in the United States. Hence, we have our own farming company to manage all of the acreage and the millions and millions of trees that we happen to grow, and we continue to grow. For those of you that are California natives, water is obviously a valuable resource. In order to maintain our leading position, the owners of the companies have bought a specific interest into the Kern County Water Bank. So that basically guarantees our supply of water. And of course, to be transparent, it puts our competitors at a slight disadvantage. Moving on. We do have, as part of our good corporate citizenship and ethical and moral responsibilities, we do have obviously numerous programs. I'm not going to go into all the details, but back in 2007, we did build the largest privately held solar farm. The owners are really big into education with investing. They've invested over $4 million in sending young students to universities. Obviously, we do believe in good agricultural practices that Dr. Gary mentioned. And we have a non-toxic company that we own based out of Oregon called Suterra. So that is part of our effort of helping support the agricultural industry in a safe manner. So let's move on into what I've been asked to talk about. So I started out my presentation by calling it, the honeymoon's ending. And the way I look at it is the rules and regulations that we were under by the FDA, for those of you that are regulated by the FDA, were pretty weak, okay? I mean, I'll be honest here. I've had the FDA show up on my front door over the last 2 years, and prior to FSMA being implemented, I could lawyer up, okay? It's pretty simple. I can show the FDA auditor my conference room. I can make sure she has a nice cup of tea. I can, tell her we can go on a GMP audit, not a problem. But the minute she starts asking for records, I can do one of two things. I can say, show me your cause. That gives you the right to ask for these records. Or number two, I can slip that piece of paper in front of her from our legal team that says, this is a fishing expedition. We're not aligned to it. When you come with a court order, then we can talk. So that was the honeymoon period in the way that we handled it. And again, I want to exclaim very clearly, this is how Paramount handled it. So now the rules have changed. We have a prenup, okay? And it's a mandatory prenup. So I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about this prenuptial agreement between us and the FDA. Most of you know this, but I was asked to go through the basics of the FSMA rules. Enacted earlier this year, when Congress came back from their Christmas break, the first thing they did is they passed this law. They describe it as the most expansive change in the food industry when it comes to regulations. I put that in quotations because I'd like to see personally how they execute this. So it's great to say, and it's great to put on paper that they have lots of intentionality, but without a method to drive this intentionality, the results can be variable. They've obviously put some regulations on food industries, and they've put regulations on importation. They've also expanded their enhancement power, and that to me is the biggest change for the FDA over the last 60, 70 years, is their enforcement power. Fees. I'm going to talk about fees here, okay? And lastly, whistleblower protection. In other words, Dr. Gary mentioned earlier about cameras and people in different states monitoring different manufacturing facilities. The nut industry isn't that complicated or isn't that sophisticated. And in order to protect some of the employees and to allow them the freedom to express some concerns that they may have, the FDA has enacted some regulations about protecting employees and their rights. So I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on some of these elements. So, new responsibilities on food facilities. What is a facility? According to the FDA's definition, it is any place that manufactures, stores, transports, or packs a food product. So that's a pretty broad definition. So any place that packs or stores or transports. That basically means any bonded warehouse, any distribution warehouse, any trucking company, any trans-shipping area, et cetera, cold storage warehouses, et cetera. FDA's come out with a new acronym. It's not really HACCP, it's HAPIC, which is a Hazard Analysis Preventative Control. It is in addition to HACCP. It is requiring these food facilities and these transport facilities to have a hazard analysis preventative control. So what does that mean? To me, my definition and Paramount's definition is that this is a holistic program related to food safety. It's not just HACCP. It's not just looking at, it's not just looking at what is your biological, chemical, and physical hazards. It is looking at what are your radioactive hazards, what are your allergen hazards, what are your pest control hazards, what are your environmental contamination hazards, etc. HAPIC or HAPC must also include training, all right, GMP training, hygiene training. It must also include your recall program and your food defense program. So again, it's gone beyond HACCP. At this day and age, it should be a no-brainer. Everybody should have HACCP. For those that don't, obviously, there's lots of resources out there to help drive HACCP and help you build a robust program. We've gone to phase 2. There is a indication in the new FSMA laws to use and support of using accredited ISO 17025 laboratories. So for those of you that may not be using accredited laboratories at the moment or are being solicited by non-accredited laboratories, my personal recommendation is to stay away from them. So importation. Any overseas facility that's manufacturing product that are coming across the U.S. borders will obviously have to be registered. Part of that registration and part of that certification and change in responsibilities is that the company that's importing the food has to ensure that the company that's manufacturing the food on foreign soil is meeting the new FSMA laws. So they've got to make sure that they have, in addition to HACCP, the HAPC program. In addition, they've got to guarantee that the food coming in is not adulterated. Now that word adulterated is pretty broad, okay? Adulterated, according to FDA, could mean obviously microbial contamination, infestation, foreign material, et cetera, et cetera. So it'd be interesting to see how this actually translates over the next couple of months with the FDA. Enforcement powers. I talked a few minutes ago about how when our regional FDA inspector would show up, we'd make sure that she was comfortable with a nice cup of tea. And then depending on where the conversation goes with her, I can do one of two things. Show her the plant or show her a legal document that says, thank you very much, please come again soon. That's gone. So, facility registrations every 2 years. I believe that program already started. It started in October. So for those of you that haven't already registered, there's a certain process that you need to go through, and of course some fees. Next month in January, the FDA is tasked with coming out with a classification list. Depending on the commodity that you're involved in, you're going to be classified as low risk, medium risk, or high risk. Obviously, with each classification comes certain frequencies of inspection, okay? And they've spelled out the frequencies of inspection. If you're a low-risk supplier, for example, they claim that they will only come once every 7 years. And I put the word claim in quotations. Increased inspections. There's a reason why they're going to start showing up more on your front door. And I'll explain that in just a second. Access to all records. And that's immediate. That is actually effective now. It was effective the day they passed the law back in January. And that is all records. That is anything that has to do with your company. The commissioner of the FDA has a right to shut you down. In other words, he can suspend your license, which indirectly means you can't operate. Typically, according to the FDA, this will only happen if it's a Class 1 and if there's a proven food safety issue or health issue to the U.S. population. So I talked about fees. So there's that registration fee. There's a recall fee. There's a increased reinspection fee. And there's, for those of you that import products into the U.S., there's an importation fee. Now, those are just the fees that they've currently announced. And by the way, for those of you that the FDA has actually set an hourly rate now. For hourly inspections in the U.S., it's roughly $250 an hour per inspector. For any overseas inspections, it's roughly $350 an hour. Okay, so just keep that in mind for the future. So, whistleblower. I talked about, protecting the employees. What really the FDA is doing here is sending out a clear message that, it's not just going to be the FDA watching and inspecting. We want to have hundreds and thousands of employees, their eyes and ears and mouths out there looking and reporting what they suspect may be harmful activity. So you've got to have a policy in place. The policy has to be cascaded down to the employees. Employees need to understand their rights and privileges under this whistleblower program. They obviously have to have a means to either anonymously or directly report concerns. That was basically the foundational aspects of FSMA as we understand it from Paramount Farms. Now, understanding it and doing something with it are two different things. So what I'm going to share in the next couple of slides is what is Paramount Farms doing to address some of the new regulations that have come out since January. I call it the forced courtship. Okay, so we've gone through the mandatory prenuptial. We know what the rules are. Now we've got to play by those rules. Legal. For those of you that interact with lawyers, they don't really have a great perception, or the typical population doesn't have a great perception of them. In this particular instance, on our staff, for all of the roll companies, we have 78 lawyers. So we wanted to put them to work and get something useful out of them. So I hope there's no lawyers in here. So what our legal team has actually been quite proactive in is actually reviewing and understanding what these regulations actually mean and translating it to something that's beneficial for us operational folks and QA folks that are in the plants every day. They're also monitoring all of the congressional and senatorial activity and industry activity that's ongoing. Consultations. One of the first things that we did as Paramount Farms or as the larger group of roll companies is we retained the previous Associate Commissioner of the FDA, Dr. James David Atchison. Dr. Atchison is now part of a consulting group called the Leavitt Partners, Leavitt. Dr. Atchison has been fabulous as part of, as in his role, supporting and letting us know what is the pulse of the FDA, what is the culture, what to expect next. Now, we're not keeping Dr. Atchison to ourselves. Dr. Atchison is actually representing the nut industry and representing Paramount Farms specifically in what we call the ACP, the Associative Committee for Pistachios. That is really the most formal body in the state of California as it relates to pistachios. Inspections. Preparing ourselves for increased inspections. What we've done is we've actually done mock inspections, okay? I've had my QA directors, my QA senior directors, show up one day literally wearing a hat that has the letters FDA on it. And when he is wearing that hat, he is an FDA inspector. And he comes in and he is doing a mock FDA audit. And there's no joking around on this. Everything has to stop when this activity happens. And all of senior management is aligned to this. And the whole idea of this mock activity is not just to see, hey, did we do good, did we do bad? More importantly, is to really set the tone with senior management that, you know what, when our regional FDA inspector comes around, the days of handing her a legal document that says, come back another day are over. Documentation. Every single record that is related directly or indirectly to your manufacturing is now at the hands of the FDA. Now, I just want to spend 2 minutes talking about emails. One of the first things our legal department did is they gave us all email training. So I'd like to share 2 or 3 points related to email training. First of all, I mentioned that we have roughly 1,500 employees. So that's 1,500 email accounts. That's 1,500 opportunities for us to get ourselves in trouble. So the first thing that we did as senior management is that we vetted who actually has email, who needs email, and should we be limiting the amount of time that people actually have access to email? Because what comes with email are these BlackBerries that we're all addicted to. So the minute that thing vibrates, the minute that it beeps, we're checking it. We've gone now to the extreme of limiting who has email, who has BlackBerries, and more importantly is the time of day that email is actually on and off. That may be a bit extreme, but I'm just sharing what we're doing. It doesn't make sense for us to have our manufacturing teams, the guys that are on the floor, on the shop floor, who are supposed to be monitoring the roasters, the pasteurizers, the packaging machines, to have email while they're supposed to be working. If it's that critical, I'm going to pick up the phone and talk to them, or I'm going to get off my chair and I'm going to go and talk to them. I'm going to walk 100 meters and go and talk to them, if it's that critical. Because what we discovered when we started vetting our emails is that the email was actually being used like a walkie-talkie. Okay, yes, no, okay, did you do this? All right, talk to you tomorrow. Is this released? Is this not released? Text messaging is a little bit different since you've got to get a court order to the phone companies to retrieve those records. I'm strictly talking about emails. At one point, since you brought it up, Dr. Temple, at one point we were considering removing emails completely. Again, that's a bit over the top, but I'm just trying to emphasize how important it is to vet every single document that you write, or every single document that you may have to show the FDA. Now, as it relates to email, 2 things I want to close with on emails. Number 1, write every email as if you're writing it to the owner of the company. Okay? So you're not going to send the owner of the company a YouTube clip of cats playing pianos, right? You're not going to send the owner of the company, the latest sale at Macy's, okay? The second thing is, imagine that every single email is going to be published in the LA Times, okay? So there's going to be, Dear John, or Dear Mr. Bellinger, blah, 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 short and concise, regards, so-and-so. Now, it sounds simple, and it sounds a bit, maybe unimportant, but we personally, as Paramount Farms, have gotten ourselves in trouble more on the safety side, the employee safety side, with emails. So I'd really like to emphasize that, and hopefully you can take that back to your IT departments. But more importantly is, Your records, your production records, your QA records, your pest control records, your microbiological testing records, all have to be complete and accurate. Because the issue isn't today. The issue is a year from now when there's a potential issue out in the market and the FDA wants to know, what did you produce, how did you produce it, when did you produce it, etc. So all that needs to be in order. Recall. We obviously reevaluated our recall program. I mean, most of you have a pretty robust recall program. You can find out where your product went within a couple of hours. That's pretty standard in the industry at the moment. Well, we wanted to go a step further and understand not just where it went, but where did they send it to. So we're stretching ourselves, and again, part of being very transparent up here is we're not there yet. We don't know for sure within a reasonable amount of time 2 steps up, okay? But we're working on that. It requires some IT infrastructure. It requires partnership and cooperation with our distributors, sales team members, et cetera, et cetera. Food safety plan. Obviously, Dr. Gary was talking about BRC, or in general, he was talking about GFSI. We went down that road years ago. We've been certified for BRC for a couple of years now. We're looking at switching over to another GFSI program called FSSC, just so that, we've had our own concerns with BRC as well, mainly in terms of how much time they're actually spending reviewing documents versus how much time they're actually inspecting on the shop floor. So we're going to be we're potentially doing a transition in the next 12 months from one GFSI program to another, just to keep all of the manufacturing groups in our company on their toes. But more importantly than that is to go back and reassess every single fundamental program you have. Your pest control program, your environmental program, your recall programs, et cetera. We've gone to the point where we've had outside folks come in and inspect our programs or audit our programs. And these are not, and I'm not talking about the BRC auditors coming in. I'm talking about individuals who have spent 20, 30, 40 years in the food industry and who are respected in their fields to come in and consult with us and say, you know what, we reviewed your pest control program. These are the 8 things you're doing well, but these are the 2 things that you could do better. So I encourage you guys to have outside verification of your fundamental programs. Whistleblower program. We obviously partnered with legal and with human resources to cascade this program out to the shop floor. So now, just like you see the minimum wage laws printed on a large poster, you'll see the whistleblower protection laws as well. And that was something that our internal legal department put together versus waiting for something official from the FDA. I had a comment earlier about lawyers and really what value they add. I personally am excited about an internal audit that our legal department put together. And this is a 200-plus question audit, 12, 13 pages long, based on, that covers several sections, which I'll talk about in a minute. But this audit, being that we're wired certain ways, we want an audit and we want to know what score we got and we want to know what to work on next. This audit, to me, is probably the most valuable thing that the legal department's given us over the last couple of years. It's pretty extensive. It's got lots of questions. It covers several areas. Facility information. What do you produce? How much do you produce? Who are the key players, et cetera. FDA inspection preparation. Do you have a regulatory program or policy that when your regulatory inspector shows up, what do you say? Who says what? Where do they sit? How can they take pictures, et cetera, et cetera? Do you have a program that says that? Quality management. Do you have all of the basic fundamentals in place? Do you have an HAPC program? Is your sanitation program verified and validated? Employee training and practices, compliance testing, and that mainly has to do a lot with your external laboratory and your accredited laboratory. Your shipping, receiving, and storage practices, are they verified? And lastly, food defense. while this was written for Paramount Farms, one thing that I don't mind sharing with the group is, and there's some acronyms in here that are specifically related to the nut industry, but I have no issue sharing this particular questionnaire or audit or whatever you want to call it with any of the participants today. We'll work out how to get it to you and all that later. But like I said, if your legal team hasn't been involved, it's probably a good time to get them involved. All right? You need their alignment and buy-in as to where you stand and what to expect. Divorce isn't an option, okay? We've got to live with these rules, all right? The honeymoon may be over. We may be forced to deal with these mandatory prenuptial agreements. We were forced into this courtship. Dr. Gary did say, we will do whatever is asked of us. So here's a couple of closing remarks before break time. The FSMA rules aren't going to go away. It's actually being administered very quickly. The Obama administration is pretty adamant that this is going to happen. It might be one of the few successes of the Obama administration. Moving forward, it's very clear that the FDA will not sit and watch. It looks like that they will be more proactive. So either prepare yourself or deal with the costs and the consequences that may come. The FDA, even though there is a budget deficit, as I mentioned earlier, they're going to be collecting a whole bunch of fees. So those fees are going to fund the FDA and the recruiting effort of the FDA. In my opinion, in the medium term, this is actually good for everybody. It might be a high hurdle. It might be a pain in the rear. It might be cumbersome. But at the end of the day, any regulation that forces any industry to raise its levels is obviously good for the consumer. Get your legal, senior management, your operational folks, your IT departments, et cetera, all wrapped around this. I want to make it very clear, this is not a QA function. This is different from when BRC shows up on your front door. When BRC shows up, your main point of contact for that auditor is most likely your QA department or your QA manager. To me, this is a regulation or a series of regulations that everybody has to be aligned with and participate with. And last but not least, there's, 30, 40, 50 people in here. Ask questions, learn from each other. Again, I am just sharing what Paramount Farms' interpretation is of the FSMA rules and what we're doing about it. So network and ask for feedback. And I believe that is my last slide. I'll be happy to answer any particular questions that anyone may have. Yes, sir.
Introduced. Is that different from the FDA's food facility registration that's part of the 2002 Bioterrorism Act?
There's different fees involved. It is not different, but there's different fees involved.
Okay.
And it's required to be renewed every couple of years.
Okay.
Yeah.
As a part of your food safety, is it any preparedness plan involved into it?
Any preparedness plan? Involving fruit.
Involving food safety.
Any preparedness plan involved? Oh, absolutely, yeah. As part of our review, we reviewed all of our internal programs. And again, being transparent, we identified gaps in our current HACCP plan, in our current food safety, food defense plan, recall plans, et cetera. So yes, those were all vetted and reviewed over the last 6 months or so. And we're currently working on filling those gaps in many of our programs. Some of those gaps will cost a little bit of money for us to fill, okay? But we're taking the most aggressive approach, assuming that the FDA is going to come in with all guns blazing, okay? So yes, we have gone through our fundamental prerequisite programs and ensured that, you know what, they are robust and that they are defensible.
And lastly, I would like to ask if you feel, or from what you understand and what you all have studied, if these fees that are going to be assessed are going to be enough to cover the additional expenses, and if not, where and what is the probability or likelihood that Congress will make up that difference?
Congress has made it very clear that the FDA has to do this, okay? It hasn't made very clear, or it hasn't given them the financial tools to go out and do it. So in my personal opinion and the opinion of Paramount, the fees are going to cover a good portion of the required, necessary costs. But I think the rest will just have to come from the current deficit. At least that's my understanding. Okay. So again, bottom line, I believe the fees will cover a majority of these costs.
Okay, great. And the last question I would have, and Chris alluded to it a bit earlier, is with so much of our produce coming in from Latin American countries and other countries, what has been discussed in terms of inspecting how these facilities would be inspected?
There's two parts, as we understand it, there's two parts to address overseas or international manufacturing. Part number one is that international manufacturer needs to be registered with the FDA. That's an easy way to collect some fees. Second thing, it's also a way for the FDA to go and visit that facility and inspect to ensure that they have the holistic programs, the holistic fundamental programs to ensure that the product that comes across the U.S. borders does not pose a food safety or health risk to the U.S. population. I mentioned earlier that the fees have been pretty much established, $250 an hour roughly for U.S. inspections and $350 per hour for international inspections. So international suppliers and the importers who are bringing the food in, and the importer could be a restaurant company, it could be a distributor, it could be a wholesaler, it could be a supermarket brand. Whoever's bringing it in also has a legal responsibility to ensure that the company they're buying from meets the FSMA rules. That's an unfortunate side effect of how slow the FDA can move when it comes to inspections. On the pistachio side, we do send a lot of our what we call closed-shelled pistachios, the ones that are fully closed. We send them to China, they open it up for us, and they ship it back. We have an operation in China that does that for us. Unfortunately, a lot of times the FDA will detain these containers when they come back because they'll test it, and guess what? They'll find salmonella in it. Well, no kidding. It's a raw agricultural product. It has not gone through a heat treatment process or any type of intervention, microbial intervention. And by the time we work it out with the FDA, that product has already been infested. Okay, it'll get Indian meal moths in it and other types of insects that basically render that product useless for us. So all I can tell you is it's an unfortunate process. What we've done is we've tried to build a pretty strong relationship with one or two key members of the Los Angeles FDA office so that when and if our containers get detained, we have that trust and relationship with that inspector and with their bosses in order to try to fast track the release of these products. But even, I'll use the word fast track pretty loosely, it can take up to 6 months sometimes for us to release containers. So I don't have a clear answer for you other than we've tried to establish good relationships with these folks and build the confidence in them that we know what we're doing. And by the way, look, we've just put in a $40 million pasteurizer. So release it. We know it has salmonella in it. It's natural. Nuts typically have about a 1 to 1.5% natural inoculation rate of salmonella. We've put in a pasteurizer, first in the world. We're ready to go, release our product. It just takes a while. So I'm sorry I don't have a...
But after the release, and there's anything for it, say,
Yes. Yes. Anytime there is some type of intervention on the product, if they've identified that it's contaminated with some pathogen, you've got to go back and prove to them that you've done all the right steps and tested the product and it's tested clear before it goes back into retail commerce. Yeah. That's how the industry has been, the nut industry has been. We as Paramount are transitioning that activity. In other words, we're reducing the amount of product we're shipping overseas simply because of the potential detaining of containers as they come in. We're actually bringing that, we're modernizing and mechanizing what the Chinese are doing for us at our facility, but that won't be for about another 6 to 8 months before we're ready. So our intention is very clear. We're bringing it in-house. Hand cracking to mechanical cracking is the way that we're going.
I had a question. I was curious about whether or not you knew if there was any sort of cross-check in place for overseas suppliers or exporters to verify that they had registered before the product comes into the U.S.
I'm pretty sure the FDA will be checking the registration of all food companies that are exporting products to the U.S. before it arrives. Having lived overseas for, 10 years, I know that anytime we were shipping samples from the Middle East to, for example, the KFC headquarters in Louisville, Kentucky, or the Pizza Hut headquarters in Dallas, Texas, we had to provide our FDA registration information. So I'm pretty sure that what's coming in now through our ports and borders is also being checked.
If I can take a quick stab at that, we'll cover some more of this in the next one when we go through some of what FDA is actually doing or has done. But yes, it will have to come in not only with its registration number, but if it's a high-risk product, it will have to be certified. So there's a list of things that FDA is doing to make sure all this happens.
Any other questions? Time for one more.
Going once, going twice.
Thank you very much, Sammer.
All right,
Appreciate it.
thank you.